Good afternoon and welcome to the Licensing Committee, which is going out via remote video link on Tuesday, the 2nd of February 2021 at 1600 hours. If we would like to start with the roll call, please, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, we have apologies from Councillor Allen. Councillor Chapman?
No, he's here.
Councillor Cromie?
Yeah, present.
Councillor DeBell?
I'm here.
Councillor Gibbs?
Present.
Councillor Gibson? Okay. Councillor Hemwood?
Present.
Councillor Knight?
Present.
Councillor Leband?
Present.
Councillor Lee, I'm here. We have apologies from Councillor Marsh. Councillor Smith?
Present.
We have apologies from Councillor Walker. Councillor Webb?
Present.
Councillor Webster?
Present.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lee. This afternoon we're joined by officers of the Democratic Services, Legal Services and Environmental Health. We're also joined by the Cabinet member, Councillor Webster, who's responsible for licensing as one of his portfolio roles. The solicitor, Franca, will give a meeting explanation. I think you all know it by now, but just to clarify, thank you, Franca.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll give you an abridged version because you quite rightly say we've been living with it for quite some time. Good afternoon, everyone. New regulations, not new, regulations have been introduced to enable the Council to hold its meetings to include those participants attending remotely. The following procedures will apply to this meeting. During the meeting, all participants will be in control of their own microphone. You should set your microphone to mute until such time as the Chairman invites you to speak. If you wish to speak, you should indicate this by activating the raise hand function found at your participants list. Please be patient. The Chairman will know that you've indicated a wish to speak and will get round to all members. The Chairman has absolute discretion as to the order in which he invites participants to speak. When the Chairman indicates you can speak, you must unmute your microphone. Once you've finished speaking, you will need to mute yourself again. And please remember to lower your hand when you have spoken. The voting at this meeting, due to technical issues, the Chairman will advise on how the meetings will take place today. If you do lose connection, please, you can rejoin by using the same calendar link and password. Just to remind you, the usual procedure rules for debates will apply to this meeting and the Chairman has ultimate discretion. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the explanation.
Thank you, Franca. Item 2 to receive apologies for absence, well as the Vice Chairman pointed out, Councillor Marsh, Councillor Mockford and Councillor Allen. Item 3 to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. If you just raise your hand with the blue, raise your hand if you have any. I see no indications. Item 4, to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on 22nd of September 2020. If you use the raise hand button to confirm that you agree with those minutes. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Item 5, to consider any items that the Chairman agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. Moving to the substantive item for this afternoon. Item 6, consider the responses to the public consultation regarding amendments to the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licence Policy as a result of the DfT statutory guidance. And it's starting on page 7. Mr. John Bryant is going to... oh, before I do, John, Councillor Webster would like to say a few words. I beg your pardon. I forgot you, Mr. Webster. Councillor Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. I just really wanted to remind the committee and anybody who might be watching that, as you said at the beginning of the meeting, I am Cabinet Member for Community, and the work covered in this particular report is part of my portfolio. And I did have a discussion about this with officers last week. And what I will try to do is keep quiet until towards the end of the debate on this item, because amongst the recommendations is a recommendation to be made to the cabinet member. So as I'm part of the committee as well, it's slightly unusual. I suppose some people might see it as that. So I will obviously listen very carefully to the views of the committee and take those forward. And of course, Chairman, both you and I share the same passion about electric vehicles and reducing emissions. And I will listen to that part of the debate very carefully as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Webster, for that introduction. Mr. Bryant, Senior Licences Officer, would you like to introduce the report to us, please?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. As you'll be aware, the purpose of the report is to seek the committee's consideration of the responses which were received during the public consultation in relation to the draft policy changes to the Hackney carriage and private hire policy. The draft changes are detailed in Appendix 1 to the report, and it's proposed that following this consideration, the policy would go before the council to be formally adopted. In the recommendations, the committee is invited to consider the responses that have been received. As I say, they're detailed in Appendix 1 through to, I believe it's Appendix 3, and to discuss the following options to be incorporated into the policy to reflect those comments. In particular, there was a particular response from the consultation in respect of the proposed policy amendment to introduce Euro 6 emission standard. And so there's two items for the committee to consider in view of the responses that were received. They're detailed a little bit more when I go through the background, but initially they're to either amend the proposed policy amendment to read that from the 1st of October 2022, all new licensed diesel vehicles would need to comply with the Euro 6 emission standard. And this would mean that vehicle proprietors have already prepared for the livery changes would not be forced to change their vehicles again, or to revise the deadline for the introduction of the Euro 6 compliance to the 1st of October 2025 instead of 2022, to provide vehicle proprietors with an opportunity to recover from the economic impact of the current COVID-19 pandemic. The other recommendation before the committee separately is to keep all the other proposals within the draft policy as is, as they're considered part of the statutory guidance. Separate to this, but obviously linked to the emissions issue, for the committee to discuss the impact that there will be of the phasing out of fossil fuel cars from the taxi and private hire fleet, in line with the current government proposals to cease the sale of these vehicles in 2030, and to, in essence, give officers a steer on the policy going forward, that and the approach that should be considered, and to consider a deadline for these vehicles to be totally removed from the licensed fleet. And the other limb to the report is to recommend to the Cabinet Member for Community, Councillor Webster, to present the revised policy with the agreed amendments to the Council for adoption in May. Going on to the background of the report, the committee considered these changes back on the meeting on the 22nd of September 2020, and the public consultation lasted for 6 weeks from the 5th of October through to the 17th of November. I've detailed the extent of the consultation to interested parties, and a total of 20 responses were received as a result of the consultation. I've attached a summary of the responses at Appendix 2. And there are more detailed responses that were received, which are attached to Appendix 3, which relate to responses from the Guide Dogs Association, the GMB Professional Drivers Union, and one of our licensed drivers, Mr. Cragen. As mentioned, the biggest response was in relation to the proposed introduction of Euro 6 emission standards for vehicles from the 1st of October 2022. And a number of drivers highlighted that this would potentially have a significant economic impact on them, especially combined with the loss of earnings during the COVID-19 pandemic. That particular amendment with regard to emissions wasn't required to be introduced as a result of the statutory standards, but was proposed in respect of the concerns around air quality. As a result of the public consultation, we have researched the number of vehicles that it could potentially affect. And I've detailed in the next paragraphs the number of vehicles which would potentially be impacted by that proposal. And just picking out one figure from section 14, there are 29 vehicles which are already white, which have been changed by drivers in preparation for the livery change, which would need to be changed again to meet the Euro 6 standards if implemented, and that amounts to almost 20% of the actual fleet. And there's a similar amount of, I think it's 37% of the private hire fleet would be affected as well. Under the current policy, when vehicles are 10 years old, they're removed from the licensed fleet and must be replaced. So that would mean under the existing policy from the 1st of September 2025, all diesel vehicles will in fact be Euro 6 standard. So the potential options as stated in respect of the proposal are at 17, which is to keep the proposed policy amendment as is, amend the policy amendment to read that as from the 1st of October 2022, all new licensed diesel vehicles would need to comply with Euro 6 emissions. And this would mean that vehicle proprietors who've already prepared for the livery changes wouldn't be forced to change their vehicles again, or to delay the introduction of the amendment to the 1st of October 2025 to provide vehicle proprietors with an opportunity to recover from the economic impact of the pandemic. At 18, it's obviously proposed by the government that the sale of fossil fueled vehicles will end in 2030, and I believe hybrid vehicles it's 2035. And the committee may wish to consider a deadline for the removal of these vehicles from the licensed fleet. Under the current vehicle age requirement of 10 years, it would mean that by 2040, the remaining fossil fueled vehicles would actually be in the process of being removed totally from the fleet. The additional responses to aspects of the proposed amendments to the policy were in general very supportive. There were concerns from some respondents around the costs associated with the implementation of safeguarding and disability training and the introduction of mandatory CCTV. Obviously, but when considering both the current and any future policy, the council's role in safeguarding and protecting the travelling public cannot be understated, and that strong measures to improve standards in the trade should be built upon and not diluted. I've detailed for the committee the policy context and the financial implications, which I don't propose to go through in detail at this point unless needed. But Chairman, unless I can help any further to yourself, that is the report before the committee at the moment.
No, thank you, Mr. Bryant. Very well explained. Thank you very much. The way I propose to take it is, if we look on page 7, recommendations, as Mr. Bryant pointed out, we've got 2 Roman numerals I and 2 Roman numerals 2. There are 2 options there, basically to keep the policy as we've discussed already for 2022 Euro 6 emissions, or extend that as part of Roman numerals 2 to the 1st of October 2025, or there is perhaps a third option that members might want to change that date, but I'm open to members for discussion. Councillor Anthea Lee, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I'd like to welcome the fact that actually we have had, some good response from the trade in relation to this consultation, and that the fact in this challenging times we have had 20 responses. And I'd like us certainly as a committee to consider the challenging times that they've had, and that in view of that, maybe we should be extending the introduction of the Euro 6 vehicles from 2022. Doesn't sound very long away in this world. It's only whatever 21 months, isn't it? So I would like us as a committee to certainly consider that the time frame should be extended.
Thank you, Councillor Atherley. Councillor Janice Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I appreciate the economic strain that the taxi drivers are undergoing, but we also, as an authority, have a very strong obligation to public health. And if you reflect upon the first time ever a case of a young girl was found to have died because of pollution, that was a case just in 2010 that was heard that the coroner suggested. So we know pollution, we know air pollution is detrimental to our public, to the health of the nation. It is economically costly also. So we have economic conflicts because we know taxi drivers will also be suffering. I would definitely support Councillor Lee's suggestion that we perhaps 2022 sounds soon. I would propose that we do extend it to the year 2023, which will allow a little bit more leeway, but to keep uppermost in our responsibility that we owe an obligation to our public health, citizens, to their health. Thank you very much, Chairman.
No, thank you. And I've noted your proposal 2023. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm minded to take a much harder view. The background to that is I lived in the centre of Haywards Heath for many years. Even the slightest window that was left open would up on the third floor of a 4-floor house would result in a film of black traffic film on a regular basis. It was horrendous. And that was in Heath Road. The Broadway's even worse. And it's not as if the Euro 6 emissions standards are anything new. My car's 2014, 2015 model. That's Euro 6 diesel. And it's been with us for some time. And the projection that we would actually be introducing and expecting all new vehicle purchases, and we're not actually penalising existing owners, but if you, in terms of the only drivers that would be affected in terms of operating costs would be those that are seeking to replace their vehicle. And what we don't want them to do is have a double whammy of having to actually upgrade a 10-year-old car 1 year and then actually change the colour the next year. So we're looking for some congruity between the two. And I feel more comfortable in it, if there's a replacement car coming onto the fleet, to actually expect them to be a new taxi to by 2022 to actually comply both with the colour and also the emission standards. And that's notwithstanding, I'm not, shall we say, sort of overlooking the consequences of COVID and the impact that's had on drivers' earnings. But I think as a licensing authority, we have an obligation to our public to actually maintain the highest possible standards.
Thank you, Councillor Band. Mr. Bryan, have we got any idea what, that might be a difficult question, but what the scale of loss of income is on an average basis, ballpark figure for taxi drivers during COVID? Or any impact assessment?
In essence, I would be guessing, Chairman, but I do know anecdotally that drivers have received a significant drop to their earnings, and I would point out there are a number of drivers since March last year, when the first lockdown started, who haven't driven their vehicle since because it's not financially viable for them.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sam Smith, please.
I agree actually with Anthea. taxi drivers have had a significant drop in their income, as the gentleman said. But the thing is, I agree it should go to 25. I understand what Janice is saying about the air pollution and things, but we don't know how long this pandemic is actually going to last for. You know, we're hoping it's going to be over when we've all had our vaccines, but we don't know what the future is going to hold. So for them to suddenly have to change their car in 22, we just don't know what's around the corner. Sorry to be a bit of a, you know, on the pandemic, but I just feel that it should be longer, 25.
Fair comments. I don't see any other. Yes, I do. Councillor Anthea Lee, please.
Sorry, could I just ask for some clarification then in the report, that because John highlighted that on page 9, where it talks about the fleet numbers of the fleet that have been replaced to comply with the white cars, that it would still require 29 of the vehicles would have to be changed again. I'm slightly confused about what these numbers mean in this regard.
Ms. Brandt, would you like to, John, explain that?
Yeah, certainly, Councillor. If I can put it into perspective, currently a number of drivers have already prepared for the introduction of the white livery and have already purchased cars for that introduction. Now, if the Euro standards was brought in from the 1st of October applying to all vehicles, then 29 of those drivers would then need to reinvest in a new vehicle because their current vehicle, which is white, would potentially need to be changed because they're not Euro 6 compliant. If you looked at the first option, that would actually enable those drivers not to have to change their vehicle straight away, because what the committee would be saying is that yes, from the 1st of October 2022, all newly licensed vehicles would need to comply with the emission standard. So it would mean that vehicles which are currently white and don't comply with the emission standards would be able to continue until they had to be changed in 1, 2 or 3 years hence after that date.
Are you okay with that, Councillor Lee? Yeah. Councillor Cromie.
Thank you.
Rachel Cromie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The way I'm reading this is that we're just giving a bit of breathing space and a little bit of time for some of our taxi drivers who've had a really hellish year in getting revenue. And so I don't think we're relinquishing our commitment to the environment. I think we're just giving some taxi drivers who need that additional breathing space and support just a little bit more time to do that.
Thank you for that. I've got that. Did you want to speak, Councillor Bell? Just we hand up earlier. Did you want to? You okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually looking for a bit of clarification, which seems to have come through. I think what we're actually saying is they wouldn't necessarily have to if they got the right colour vehicle, they wouldn't necessarily have to change their vehicles anyway until such time as they're forced to be compliant. I understand that it was an interesting choice of words by Councillor Cromie about breathing space. I think that there's some very good points made by Councillor Henwood. And some very good points made by Councillor Van, also by our Vice Chairman. I think what we're wanting to do is to be fair to the taxi drivers, but to also bring them into line. And I don't know. I mean, my feelings are that Councillor Henwood's sort of halfway stage might actually serve the bill, but I look forward to being persuaded either way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor de Bow, would you be willing to second Councillor Henwood's proposal of 2023?
I will indeed.
Okay, I see no more there's no more indication. So what I'm going to do is we're going to vote on I think there's three options here. We've got oh no, hang on, Councillor Webster, you want to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to give you a few thoughts. Should I do that before the vote or after the vote? Because
I think it's pertinent that you speak before the vote because you might change people's opinions. So please do.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I am very pleased at the number of responses that we've received from the trade, from the trade union, who are there to protect the drivers and their interests. And we've also had a very good response from the guide dogs as well, who are there to protect the interests of disabled passengers to a certain extent as well, certainly those with compromised eyesight. And I think it is right that we consider the death of that child from air pollution. And very, very sadly, that child grew up in an area of exceedingly poor air quality, which we fortunately are nowhere near in mid-Sussex. Our air quality is very significantly better than that, and I certainly aim to keep it like that. I think it's important to remember that taxi drivers do tend to drive second-hand vehicles, and it does take a certain period of time for technology to feed through to them. But I do think that we need to take into account the economic impact that there has been on cab drivers and on the general population, because I know there are some drivers who probably won't bother to come back out after the pandemic. And my concern is that we have enough people coming into the profession to serve the needs of the residents of mid-Sussex as well. So that is something that we need to consider. And finally, just in terms of the environmental impact, over the last year, we've had significantly fewer vehicles on the roads. So hopefully we have actually demonstrated our kindness to Mother Earth and the environment to a certain degree. And that doesn't mean that when we go back to being out of lockdown, that we go back to our old habits either. We need to take the best out of what we have learned now. And I found the discussion and the questions and reading the report several times very interesting and informative. So thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you, Councillor Webster. Articulate as ever. Councillor Webb, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like a little bit of clarification on point one. It says all new licenses.
Can't hear you, Councillor Webb. You speak. Sorry. Try.
Right. All new licensed diesel vehicles will apply. Are we talking about new licensed diesel vehicles or new licensed diesel vehicles?
Mr. Bryant, would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. What it relates to is new vehicles which are coming onto the fleet. So when a driver needs to change his vehicle for whatever reason, then that vehicle will only be licensed if it's Euro 6 or above. So existing vehicles, they would be renewed as normal, but when the driver came to change that particular vehicle, or a new driver came in and wanted to license a brand new vehicle, that vehicle would have to be Euro 6 compliant.
Are you okay with that, Councillor Webb?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ban, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's almost a point of order, if I may. My understanding was that the motion that Councillor Henwood was promoting and Councillor Bell was seconding was the number 2 to revise the deadline for the introduction of the Euro 6 compliance, blah, 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 to October 23. But a reference to page 21 of the report down to the proposed amendment. It says from the 1st of October 2022, all licensed diesel vehicles must be compliant with Euro 6 emissions standard and petrol vehicles with the Euro 4 standard. That's missing from the recommendation. And my feeling is for transparency, it should be in there included. So I think it needs a minor amendment to actually make it kind of supportable. If I can,
I get your point, Councillor Band, but I do think we know, sort of think we know what we're voting on here. But I take your point. So I mean, where I want to take this is that, so we'll have a vote on the date of 1st of October 2022, then on the 2023, and then on the 2025 date. I think that's the best way to play it. See how members take that. So if you do raise your hand, we'll do on the initial proposal, 1st of October 22. Who agrees with that? Do your blue hand, please.
Sorry, Chair, I beg your pardon. I want to interrupt for a point of order. My understanding was that if there's an alternative amendment to the recommendation, that should be the motion that's heard first. And if it's passed, we don't have the others.
I think we're getting a little bit semantic here, really. It is, you know, you've got three options, and I'm looking for the majority here. That's the way we're going to lead it. I'll just check with Franca. Would you like this list to just clarify that, if that's okay?
I would just say, Chairman, given that we're all working remotely and we need this to work as seamlessly as possible, I think what you propose, the way you propose to deal with it, is probably the most pragmatic way forward. I do get what Councillor Laband has said, but if we were all round a table, it would be easier to deal with. So I appreciate that. I think probably the way you've set it out is, given the circumstances we're operating in, is the best way forward.
Thank you, Franca. Right, so we're going to vote on the initial proposal, 1st of October 2022. Please raise your hands if you would want to see that. I don't see any indications. Is that correct, Officer Tank? Just confirm that. No. There are no indications for that original date. Then we'll move to the change of the date proposed by Councillor Henwood of 2023, 1st of October 2023. So all those in favour of that, please raise their hands. That is 8 for that. You could drop the hands. And those for 2025. Right, okay. And I forgot to vote myself, so I would have voted for 2023. So that's 9 for the 2023 and 3 for the 2025 and none for the original proposal. So that'll go forward to the cabinet member and the cabinet for just further discussion. Thank you very much for that bit, that discussion. Very good. Okay, now we're going to move to all the other proposals that are on pages 12 to 21, bearing in mind we've already debated these back in September. So really it's in reflection of what the representations have said, of people have said, have come in with representations. If you feel that that's had sort of changed the way we should feel about it. So if anybody's got anything on those proposals on page 2021, please raise your hand. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to raise a point in Appendix 2. It's on page 23. It's in regard to a response from West Sussex County Council from the safeguarding team. I'd just like to know whether our training includes what is stated there, including training on wider criminal exploitation to include county lines and modern slavery.
Ms. Brandt, would you like to take that, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Councillor. The the proposed training will include county lines and modern slavery, and in fact, at the moment, the safeguarding team at West Sussex County Council are seeing if they can draw up a bespoke training package for our drivers, which once they've got the package together, I can put to the committee for them to view.
Do you want to come back? Are you okay with that?
No, no, thank you for that. That's helpful.
Councillor Janice Henwood, please.
Thank you. This is a question, Chairman. If a taxi has been damaged, how soon or do they report it to the District Council if the car has suffered damage?
Mr. Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor, they are required by the legislation to report it to the council within 72 hours of the damage occurring.
So that's interesting because we're requiring 48 hours, which is very good, the proposed amendment, for 48 hours for any kind of driving license, any police. So I was wondering, why is the thinking for it to be 72 hours after a car has been damaged? Just curious about that. Thank you.
It's actually set out in the actual Act, in the 1976 Act, that it's 72 hours to report damage to the vehicle. The 48 hours reporting either a conviction or arrest or interview by the police, that actually comes out of the statutory guidance recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I see no more indications on that. So the recommendation is to Roman numerals 3 to keep all other proposals within the draft policy as is, as they are considered statutory guidance. So please raise your hands if you agree with that. Councillor Webb, are you abstaining or are you? I can't hear you, you're on mute.
Sorry,
Yeah, okay, brilliant. That's unanimous then. Thank you very much. Item 4 on the recommendations is to discuss the impact of phasing out fossil fuel cars from the taxi and private hire fleet in line with current government proposals to stop the sale of these vehicles in 2030 and to consider a deadline for these vehicles to be totally removed from the licensed fleet. Open to members. Councillor Webster, please. Councillor Webster.
Sorry, Chairman, that's an old hand. I'll take it down.
Okay, Councillor Band.
Likewise, my hand hadn't been cleared. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. I see no indications at the moment. We're looking for a deadline in terms of phasing out the diesel or fossil fuel cars. Do the committee want that in line with the 2030 date set by the government for stopping the sale of the car? So if nobody wants to speak, I'll put that as a proposal. That will be the date that we send forward to forward to cabinet for the last 8 people that can use. Oh, okay. I beg your pardon. Right, Councillor Lee, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I'd like, to us to see as a council, us having an ambition towards this date. I mean, I think this needs to be in line with other government policy. It seems to me that there's got to be the infrastructure and you know, it all ties up with many other things, but I certainly think we should have that ambition, and there should be, you know, the drivers need to kind of have the education and the expectation of what's going to be coming down the road. So, you know, I don't, in that context, you know, whatever we can do as a council to get that message out, you know, I'm fully supportive of that. And certainly I think that's, you know, that's the way we should be moving to, but there needs to be kind of, it seems to me it needs to be kind of across other government policy. It's not something that you can kind of do in isolation.
Yes, I fully understand that. But would you be proposing, if other things move along at the same pace of charging points or hydrogen cells, all those sort of things that are coming along, 2030, with that, is that a date that you would like to see?
Well, I would think so, but it's very hard to kind of say this date in isolation to
Understand that. Okay, I've got your point. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. And the answer to that simple question is yes, I would. 2030 is the date that I'm aiming for. And I think the council should be too.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's important to remember that taxi drivers do tend to drive second-hand vehicles. And if 2030 is the prescribed date by government for banning the sale of any other vehicles, then we should give a short lead in time to that. And previously we seem to have worked on 10-year margins. So seeing as we've just recommended 2023 for the other compliance, we should perhaps be setting a target 10 years hence. Personally, I would like to see fossil fueled vehicles banned sooner than that, but we need to have some sort of realistic target date. And I do agree with Councillor Lee that it is very much dependent on government policy and government subsidy, for example, on infrastructure. And the taxi drivers do have to have all the appropriate infrastructure in place when such a ban were to come into play. But I do think, and I do think strongly, that we should have ambition in this area. So perhaps a recommendation that it should be by 2033 at the latest might be something that's workable. But we certainly need to have ambition, and it needs to be driven by wider government policy. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Webster. Franca, do you want to come in now at that point?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I just say, I think target setting is wonderful, and as you said, it gives everybody the message out there that that's what we're hoping to move. You're hoping to move towards. However, what I would say is that with all targets, they do have to be reviewed and revisited as we go along the journey, and it could be something that is on our officers' radar to keep abreast of how things are going with regards to infrastructure and changes and everything. And then what if it becomes quite apparent that the infrastructure is not going to be available, or as much majority of it is not going to be available by that deadline, then it can be brought back to the members and revisited, and a new target date set. I know it's not ideal, but it can always. As Councillor Lee says, we have to move with as fast as the slow implementation or whatever of any infrastructure. And things are changing so quickly, so we need to keep monitoring it. That's all. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Also, if you think about it, though, all new housing have come along, like the Northern Arc, for instance, is having electric charging points. I don't think it's solely responsible of local government or government to implement. You know, people are buying electric cars and they're putting electric points outside their houses. So I don't think we should get too tied down on the it's all government council. And I think it'll be market driven as well. That would be a big factor. And I do think we'll need to get to a point where we do set some sort of target so that the taxi community know what's coming. Councillor Cromie, please.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with Councillor Webster. From reading the comments made by the taxi drivers, you can see a huge element of frustration that they feel that the goalposts are being moved and that impacts their livelihood. So I think setting the expectation really early on helps them to be able to plan when they're buying their fleet, when they're buying their cars. They can make more informed decisions, which might help alleviate that frustration that they feel like every couple of years a new diktat comes down and they have to financially be impacted by that. And secondly, I think we should really heed Councillor Webster's advice on the fact that they're buying second-hand cars. And so therefore, there does need to be a kind of staggering and an acceptance that it might take a little time for what government would like to see being implemented in taxi drivers. And I think setting realistic expectations might help that frustration from the taxi drivers if they feel like we're working with them, not working against them all the time.
Thank you, Councillor Cromie. Just something I've also thought about is that if we don't have a deadline, somebody could buy a fossil fuel car in 2029 and still be using it, 10 years hence. So something you need to just think about. Councillor Janice Henwood, please.
Thank you very much. I definitely would agree with the 2030. As already previously said, we need to be ambitious. And as we've been told, these targets are reviewed. And it's not just national policy that will dictate what happens. As we've already said, our local planning with the EV charging points at houses, our local district car parks where we can have EV charging. So it's not just national, it's also us locally to be responsible. And we can review the targets as has already been stated. So I definitely would support 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ban.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to argue against myself about that. I hear what other councillors are saying about setting targets, and and not setting a target and achieving that is not somewhere I want to go. We have to set a target and aim to get there, even if we miss. Got to try our best. And balancing that with Councillor Webster's perhaps more lenient suggestion is that any car on the fleet has got a 10-year lifespan. So if a car's 2 years old, it's brought into the fleet tomorrow, it's got 8 more years before it's got to actually be retired. And so the likelihood is that if we did tweak this as a committee, as a target, I would be very loath to actually push it back more than that 10-year deadline. So in other words, if anybody bought a car over the next 6 months, that car's going to be from new, has got an absolute deadline of, shall we say, October 31 as the the most lenient target we could possibly set. And then I work backwards from there to something more reasonable. And I'll leave it at that as to whatever motion we vote for in a minute. Thank you.
No, thank you, Councillor Ban. Frank, just a question. I see it in a recommendation on number 3 that it's going to go to the cabinet member. Would this not have to go through scrutiny or full council if we would come up with a proposal like this?
I'm not aware it would. I think it goes to Councillor Webster as the cabinet member, and then it will go to full council. Is that correct, Councillor Webster? I think it will go to full council to be decided upon. From memory, taxi matters do tend to go. Policy changes do tend to go to full council.
Did you want to comment, Councillor Webster?
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, it says recommend to the cabinet member for community to approve the revised policy and with the agreed amendments in point 2 above for adoption and implementation. That does not say that it's going to go to council.
No, okay, good. Thank you for clarification. The way I'm going to take it, but no more speakers at the moment. I see Councillor Gibson has joined us. Don't think you'll be able to vote because you haven't taken part in the full meeting, unfortunately. I'm going to have a vote on those who want the 2030 target and those who want a later date. I think is the way to play it, rather than start arguing about 2031, 32. So all those in favour of a 2030 deadline, please raise your hand now. Okay. That is 7 votes. And those who would like a later date, please raise your hand. And that is 4. So, Councillor Webster, you have a little steer there. Thank you very much, everybody, on that interesting debate.
Thank you, Chairman. That's very helpful.
So, item 3, recommend to the Cabinet Member for Communities to approve the revised policy with agreed amendments in point 2 above for adoption and implementation on the 1st of May 2020. Is that oh, Franca, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. I was just to move on from what I said before. Councillor Webster, would you be reporting it to full council to note rather than voting on it? I'm sorry, I didn't make myself clear. It's just something that I would expect that would be reported to full council as it's a policy change. That's all. Thank you.
I'm perfectly happy to report it to council, as I think all policy changes are. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, right. So we're on page 7, recommendation 3. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, everybody. That's unanimous. Moving to item 7, questions pursuant to Council Rule 10.2. I have none. Therefore, I close the meeting at 4:52. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for a very good debate.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And whoever's operating that jet balloon engine somewhere.
I'm going to have to get an upgrade.